Now, I know we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now.
It's this guy again. And I swear to non-existent God, I didn't leave it at this point on purpose. Because, sincerity. It's not exactly this guy's strong point, considering the last video's, extremely sincere questions. But okay, cool. Let's finish them off. Because, well, apparently it's all downhill from here.
Doesn't it bother you a little bit that when we come to talk about the origins of the universe,
that no one talks about how, according to my Sir Six big book of how the universe did the being, that the universe started with whiskey, and then there was more whiskey, and then I guess a universe happened? You know, they don't teach this stuff in school, and frankly, I completely agree. That's disgusting and needs to be changed immediately. Hashtag teach the whisk-traversy.
And if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too, that the only real options you've got besides God is a past infinite universe, which is impossible.
I'm sorry. What qualifies you to say that the past infinite universe is in fact impossible? Especially when you believe something that I would call equally unlikely? Hell, if Lord Godric is real and as described, shouldn't an infinite universe totally be possible? Or is he just not that powerful? Because that would be very, very interesting if that were the case.
Or the universe coming to exist uncaused out of nothing, or something far less clear than even those.
So basically a bunch of unknowns. We don't know how the universe started exactly. So many of us, when asked, will say, well, it could be any number of things. Is this surprising to you? I mean, your belief in the origins of the universe are based on a random book, and I'm going to be super nice here, but it is demonstrably flawed at best. No one knows how the universe started, but the people who can admit that, and that's fine.
It seems that for any worldview that includes atheism, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to the origin of the universe.
What? Generally speaking, atheism in a worldview has no business explaining the origins of anything. It certainly doesn't claim to, so it doesn't need to. And at the end of the day, I can point out how you are probably wrong about something without the need to give a perfect alternate explanation. Like, if we find a dead body covered in gunshot wounds in the middle of a room, and you proclaim that the cat sleeping in the corner is definitely the perpetrator, I don't need to know who the real killer is to know that that is definitely not true. And there's certainly not a cat with a gun pointed at my head right now telling me to say that. No. Don't shoot, I think they bought it.
And all the attempts to try and circumvent that problem seem desperate.
Oh, fuck off. This is sincerity to this guy. This is trying to have an actual discussion and not talking down or to try and gotcha people. Yeah, sure, you are sincere. Sincerely full of shit, dude. Brilliant.
And at least far less likely than theism.
The universe could be a process of expansion and collapse that repeats over and over again, and not in a time being infinite-like way, but as a self-contained loop. That's one explanation. That, while flawed, seems plausible. Or, far more likely apparently, a big scary cloud man made the universe because he was bored and likes to f*** with people, and is both all-powerful and an utterly impotent incompetent. Yeah, I know. When you put it like that, it sounds stupid. That's because it is. Fight me.
My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses.
So you aren't going to ask me what I think because you have already heard what other people think. Oh, apparently I am everyone else now and don't have my unique perspective on things, especially not involving copious amounts of whiskey or nothing. No, bleep bloop, atheist bot 5000 at your service, I guess. Dick.
My question is simply this. When you step away from the debate mode that it's so easy for us all to get into online.
I'm never in debate mode. I'm always in, hey, that's kind of dumb mode, where I just nitpick at all the stupid shit that people say until there's nothing left but a quivering pile of jelly that used to be that person's arguments/feelings. Also, I gotta bring up whenever I get the chance. If your response to everyone and everything you disagree with is to shout, debate me! You are just the worst. And I mean, you could agree with me on every single point, but I see you pulling that crap, I'm going to think that you're a massive dipshit. Not saying that there's anything wrong with debate in general, but if that's the only way you can communicate, someone needs to get you a book on social interactions.
Doesn't this issue destabilize you a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism.
No, that's because you think you have the answer, but again, you don't. You literally have nothing, because if you can't prove God, which you can't, then you can't prove that he created shit. So you are just as destabilized. The only difference is you are too ignorant and too arrogant to realize it.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest?
Holy shit, an interesting and unique question. Who are you and what have you done with the pretentious idiot from before? Dare I answer? Or is he going to screw this one up by being a cock about it? Anyway, they are largely interesting in general. The creativity required to make up a god-man who farts the universe into being and made the world out of his collection of pre-war hot dogs is pretty fascinating. It doesn't make it correct, of course, but it's certainly a window into the mind of someone who could create/believe such an idea.
Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one?
Oh no, you've confused interesting with being in any way, shape or form believable. I knew he would ruin it. None of them weigh in the favour of theism, because they are all ridiculous tall tales of creatures waving their hands about and turning things into other things in a sort of elaborate magic trick. It's the kind of thing that only a moron thinks isn't an allegory and takes as fact of how anything happened. I bet even, or especially, the writers were like, this is silly, right? But it's supposed to be poetic. No one would ever believe that the universe came to be this way, right? No one could possibly be that ridiculous. So we don't have to put the following is a work of fiction disclaimer in. Cool? Can you imagine?
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything.
Yep, senses are weak. Human brains are flawed. You could be suffering one giant lifetime-spanning delusion and actually just be in a hospital bed somewhere in a vegetative coma. That's why people like to demand proof and act with a reasonable assumption that if all that proof fits together in a reasonable way, then it's probably true. And you probably aren't in a coma or a simulation or any other number of other possible, but frankly, not very useful to believe alternatives to our current reality. Any honest person, atheist or no, should be able to admit something like that is a possibility.
But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true.
Yeah, you're right. That is way too much to ask. I mean, you haven't got any, so quite frankly, we're just being unfair when we ask for that. So you know what? All I'm going to ask for is that I get a single email from god@god.god saying, "Hi, God here, me am totally the real." If I get that, I'll consider your position, okay?
Well, when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough.
Well, when I ask for evidence and you tell me about how when you did a ritual designed to make you feel a spiritual feeling, you felt a spiritual feeling, and that you have spent your whole life believing something and attributing random events to that belief, unfortunately, neither of those is actually a thing that I can interact with. So that's not going to be something I can do anything with. Then you have the, oh, look how pretty X is, or how can you say there isn't a God when Y exists? But there are pretty much always natural explanations for those. So yeah, it's not good enough is a really, really good way to put it, and perhaps something you should really think about.
So what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you?
Yeah, lots. Really obvious stuff mostly, like a person with God powers doing God stuff, taking me on a trip to the afterlife and all that jazz. That would be pretty compelling. That, or giving me a bottle of infinite whiskey. I mean, that would just be a total, okay, sure, you're definitely God, now excuse me while I attempt to empty this.
Do you know?
Do you always have to put in passive-aggressive jabs like you are talking to idiot toddlers who haven't thought about this stuff? Like, a lot? First off, that's my job, But even me, a moron, has put in countless hours figuring out what I do and don't believe, or more what I do and don't think is more likely. This isn't shit I came to for no reason and continue to believe just because. That's what theists do. Hashtag shots fired. Calm down, that was a joke.
And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that's not even always necessary for science.
Well, isn't that just an admission of, you can't experiment on or reproduce any of my claims if I ever heard one? And even when that's not technically the case, you still have inferences that can lead to predictive models, etc. And that doesn't help your case either. In fact, none of it does. And at that point, who cares what you have to say? It's all just words.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism?
Zero. I would elaborate, but there's literally nothing. I don't believe because I don't believe. That's how belief works. Or at the very least should. If you decide to believe something or not based on something other than what you think reality looks like, well, I'm not even sure how one does that without having a very, very weird brain.
That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament.
Okay, serious-ish. Answer alert. Thing was, I wasn't necessarily Crimsbium before I saw the light, so to speak. While I was dragged to church somewhat regularly in my youth, that was the only part of the week that religion even turned up, and being the precocious little shit that I was, I got kicked out of Sunday school for asking questions and finding the Christianity thing a bit silly, and thus making the Sunday school teacher cry because of it. I was always destined to be an internet arsehole. So by the time I was old enough to get round to dropping God, I was just basically deist. That is to say, someone who believes in God but nothing too specific, with some basic Yahweh-inspired ideas of what that might look like for me. But I wasn't religious for years before I dropped the final part. So no, that had nothing to do with my decision, even though the moral failings of Christianity were obvious to me way before then.
It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process.
Right, I think you're confusing becoming atheist with figuring out that the religion I currently believe has some fatal flaws. Now, does that often lead to full-on baby-eating atheism? No doubt. But it's not really the same thing. Many deconvert from one set of beliefs and move on to a similar but distinctly different set. Happens all the time. But yeah, seeing that various doctrines are completely illogical or are just plain wrong in a philosophical sense is obviously the first step to figuring out something's not right. It would be super weird if it didn't work like that.
It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were.
Well, if that's the case, then you should stop being a Christian. Ha ha! LOL.
I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
You can't start to question something without the motivation, but once the ball is rolling, people do look for evidence. And then, shockingly, don't find any, and this is often distressing, so they search harder and find that there's so much less than they ever thought. That is one of the most common deconversion tales I have heard. Both parts, the evidence and the disagreements, are fundamental to how people deconvert. And dismissing that, well, it's just you being your good old, honest, sincere self, isn't it?
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject?
I can't read. And what has that got to do with anything? Do any of them have evidence for God in them? Is there a cheeky snapshot of God getting drunk down at the local bar? Frankly, I've seen plenty of academic arguments for God or theism, and they are almost always way less smart than they think they are. And the most annoying of which is when someone states a bunch of scientific facts and then ends with, therefore God. That shit is just lazy.
How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet sources, pop-level books, and, let's face it, YouTube videos?
Why should that even matter? Here's the thing, you can get a full-on, solid grasp of many scientific fields and how some of the basics work from YouTube videos. You can do that science for yourself from those basic sources. But the religious stuff does what exactly? And if the only way you can justify your belief is because you have read some really wordy book by a fossil of a human being who has long since lost the capacity for true self-reflection, well, you are probably already lost, mate.
And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side?
Well, clearly you, Mr. Well-Read Mate, are not capable of pushing this best out yourself. And apparently no one is. It's almost like deep down, when you really get to the heart of it, you're all full of shit. Right, last question. Thank Atheismo.
Let's finish with a pretty common one. If you found out today to your satisfaction that Christianity were true, would you accept God's authority, repent of your sins, and trust Jesus as your king?
See, the fact that you don't understand why that's such a dishonest question demonstrates the failure of this video's stated claim. I can know something's real and still intellectually understand it as being bad. I mean, saying that Christianity is true is a stupid fucking thing to say, because the main source is the Bible, and the Bible doesn't even agree with itself. So which version? They all have their flaws. And I'm not going to accept someone who I see as objectively immoral's rule over me, regardless of punishment. People do it all the time. You're just going to end up with a dictator lord, with a bunch of political prisoners, and you'll be sat there wondering why these people would deny the love of the boot pressed firmly on their faces. Mate, I think you might be an idiot.
Wait, before you go, I have something super important to tell you. It's life or death. It will change everything forever. Nope. Wait, it's gone. Oh well, probably wasn't important. But while I have you, don't forget to comment, subscribe and notify. And if you want more of my smexy voice, check out Mrs. Six's channel Spoonstaff Stories, where I narrate and voice all the videos, and she does the work. And if you want to support the channel, check out the merch store for cool t-shirts, or check out Patreon, memberships and PayPal to support directly. Finally, follow me on the medias of social to get completely pointless guff and to keep up on the latest releases. Oh, I just remembered what I was going to tell you. Whatever you do, don't touch the